Ever walked into Home Depot to grab a quick fitting for a PEX repair, only to find out weeks later that your ceiling is dripping water because you grabbed the wrong homeowners have no idea that there are two completely different types of PEX plumbing systems, and mixing them up can lead to slow leaks, burst connections, PEX A versus PEX B, how to identify exactly what you've got in your house, and how to make sure you never grab the wrong fitting again. Plus, stick around to the end where I'll share a pro tip that could save you from two distinct systems. And understanding the difference between them is one of the most important things you can learn as a DIY plumber. Once you know what to look for, you'll never make the wrong choice at the hardware store again. So let's start by understanding what PEX A and PEX B actually are and why this distinction matters so much. Now, when you look at PEX pipe on the shelf, you might think it's all the same stuff. The difference is actually in how the pipe itself is manufactured, and more importantly, how it connects to. It wasn't even called PEXA back then because there was nothing else to compare it to. It was developed by a company called Wurzbo, and it used a specific method called the angle method to cross-link the polyethylene. Molecule heated up with a heat gun, and it will return to its original round shape. The molecules kind of reset themselves. That's a huge advantage when you're snaking pipe through floor, joists, and tights as called the Selene method. This pipe is still excellent, still durable, still rated for the same pressures and temperatures, but it's slightly stiffer and doesn't have that same thermal memory. If you kink PEX B, you've got a problem. You'll need to cut out that section and splice in a new piece. Here's where it gets critical. PEX A and PEX B use completely different connection systems. They are not interchangeable. Let me say that again because this is the number one mistake I see homeowners make. The fittings for PEX A and the fittings for PEX B are designed for their specific pipe type only. If you use a PEX B crimp fitting on PEX A pipe, or vice versa, you're setting yourself up for a failure down the road. When you walk into Home Depot or Lowe's, almost everything on the shelf is going to be PEX B. That's the dominant system in retail stores. But here's the interesting part. If your home was built by a professional plumber, especially most pros prefer it because of the better flow rates and easier installation. So you've got a situation where the hardware stores are selling mostly one system, but a huge number of homes are plumbed with the other. You can see how easy it is to grab the wrong thing. Now let me show you exactly how to identify what type of PEX system you have in your home. This is the most important thing you can do before buying any fittings or attempting any repairs. Pipe has information printed along its length. You're looking for the words PEX A or PEX B somewhere in the text. Sometimes it will say the manufacturer name followed by the type. However, if your home is more than 25 years old, you might have pipe that simply says PEX or even just the brand name Wurzbo without specifying A or B. In those older installations, if it says Wurzbo, you almost certainly have PEX A because that was the original system. But here's the foolproof method that works every single time. Look at your connection points. Go under your kitchen sink, check behind your washing machine, look at your water heater connections, or head down to your basement or crawl space where you can see exposed plumbing. What you're looking for are the rings that secure the pipe to the fittings. If you see brass or plastic rings that sit right up against the fitting and the pipe looks like it was expanded over the fitting, you've got PEX A. These expansion rings have a distinctive look. The pipe actually flares out slightly where it meets the fitting because the installation process involves expanding, actually inserts inside the pipe, and then the ring compresses the pipe down onto the fitting from the now to check your home. Look at 3 or 4 different connection points to make sure they're all the same. I'll explain why in a minute, but you could potentially have both systems in your house, especially if previous owners did their own repairs. Now that you know how to identify your system, let's talk about why you absolutely cannot mix these fittings with the wrong pipe type. This is where that fatal mistake comes into play. A hardware store and grab a PEX B crimp fitting, because that's what was on the shelf. The fitting will physically slide into your PEX A pipe. It will look like it fits. You'll crimp that ring down, and everything will seem fine. Water will flow, no immediate leaks, and you'll pat yourself on the back for a job well done. But here's the problem. PEX. A pipe has different wall characteristics than PEX B. The crimp system isn't designed to create a proper seal on PEX A material. Over time, the connection can work itself loose. Temperature changes cause the pipe to expand and contract slightly. Water pressure pulses through the system every time a valve opens or closes. Slowly, imperceptibly, that fitting starts to fail. It might take 6 months, it might take 2 years, but eventually you're going to have a leak. And because these leaks often start as tiny seeps, they can go unnoticed for a long time, causing water damage behind walls, under floors, or in ceilings before you ever see a drop. The same thing happens in reverse. If you try to use PEX A expansion fittings on PEX B pipe, you got a different problem. PEX B doesn't have that thermal memory I mentioned earlier. When you try to expand it, it doesn't behave the same way. It won't shrink back down uniformly around the fitting. You'll get an improper seal right from the start. By the way, if you're finding this helpful so far, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about the tools you'll need for each system, because this is another major difference between PEX A and PEX B. For PEX B installations and repairs, you've got 2 main options for creating connections. The first is a crimp tool with copper crimp rings. This tool has jaws that squeeze down on a copper ring, compressing it tightly around the pipe and fitting. A decent crimp tool will run you anywhere from $30 to $60, and the copper rings cost just a few cents each. The second option is a cinch clamp tool with stainless steel cinch clamps. This tool pinches a tab on the stainless clamp, tightening it around the connection. Cinch tools are similarly priced, usually around $40 to $70. Both methods work great for PEX B, and honestly, I slightly prefer the cinch clamps because they're a little more forgiving if you're working in tight spaces. The tool is narrower and easier. You need an expansion tool. Expansion tool, like the Milwaukee or DeWalt versions, will run you somewhere around $350 to $450. That's a serious investment for a homeowner who might only do a handful of repairs. But here's the good news. They make manual expansion tools that work just as well for occasional use. These hand tools cost anywhere from $70 to $120, depending on the brand and quality. You insert the tool into the end of the pipe, squeeze the handles, and it expands the pipe diameter. You typically need to expand it 2 or 3 times. rotating the tool slightly each time to ensure an even expansion all the way around. The manual tool takes more effort and more time, but for a homeowner doing occasional repairs, it's absolutely the way to go. Save your money. Make sure your pipe end is cut cleanly and squarely. I like to use a PEX tubing cutter for this. They're inexpensive, usually around $10 to $15, and they give you a perfect cut every time. A clean cut is important because any rough edges or angled cuts can prevent a proper seal. Next, slide your expansion ring onto the pipe. Push it back about 2 inches from the end so it's out of your way while you work. This is an easy step to forget, and trust me, there's nothing more frustrating than completing an expansion and then realizing the ring is still sitting on your workbench. Now, take your expansion tool and insert the head into the end of the pipe. If you're using a manual tool, squeeze the handles firmly and hold for a second or two. Then release, rotate the tool about a quarter turn, and expand again. Do this 3 times total to ensure the expansion is even all the way around. Here's a critical detail. You need to work quickly after expanding. PEX A pipe will start shrinking back to its original size almost immediately. You've got maybe 30 to 45 seconds before it's too tight to get the fitting in. So have your fitting ready to go before you start expanding. Slide the fitting into the expanded pipe as far as it will go. Then slide your expansion ring up until it's right against the shoulder of the fitting. Now, just wait. The pipe will contract around the fitting over the next few minutes, creating an incredibly sections. Again, start with a clean, square cut on your pipe. Same tool, same principle. For PEX B, you're inserting the fitting into the pipe rather than expanding the pipe over the fitting. Push from the end of the pipe right over where the barbs of the fitting are sitting inside. Take your crimp tool, position it squarely over the ring, and squeeze firmly until the handles close completely. After crimping, I always use a go/no-go gauge to check my work. This simple tool costs maybe $10, and it tells you whether your crimp is within the proper tolerance. One end should slip over the crimped ring easily. The other end should not fit at all. Now let's talk about what happens when you've got both PEX A and PEX B in your house, or when you need to transition from one system to the other. The good news is that you can connect PEX A to PEX B, but you need to use the right transition fitting. These fittings are designed with one end rated for PEX A expansion connections and the other end rated for PEX B crimp or cinch connections. When you're making this transition, treat each end according to its own system. Expand the PEX A side using your expansion tool and ring. Crimp or cinch the PEX B side using the appropriate method. Let's talk about some common problems you might run into and how to solve them. First problem. You've made a PEX A expansion connection, but the fitting won't fully insert into the pipe. This usually means you didn't expand the pipe enough times, or you waited too long after expanding. The fix is simple. Expand again. Second problem, your PEX B crimp connection is leaking right after installation. 9 times out of 10, this means the fitting wasn't fully inserted before you crimped. You need to cut the pipe and start fresh with a new fitting and ring. Third problem, you're seeing small drips at a connection that's been in place for a while. The safest solution is to cut out the old connection and install a new one. Fourth problem, you've kinked your PEX pipe while working in a tight space. If it's PEX A, Grab a heat gun and apply heat evenly around the kinked area. If it's PEX B, cut out the kink section and splice in a new piece. Now for that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning. After you've made all your connections and before you turn the water back on, do a pressure test. You can buy a simple pressure test gauge that threads onto a hose bib for around $20 to $30. Close all your fixtures, attach the gauge, and turn on the water. Watch that gauge for a full 5 minutes. If the pressure drops at all, you've got a leak somewhere. But here's the pro move. After the initial test holds steady, go around and physically flex each connection point. Give the pipes a gentle push and pull near every fitting. Then check your gauge again. Sometimes a connection that seems fine under static pressure will fail when there's movement. This simulates what happens over time as your house settles and temperatures change. So that's everything you need to know about PEX A versus PEX B. Remember, the number one fatal mistake is using the wrong fittings for your pipe type. Take 5 minutes to identify what system you have before you buy anything. If this video helped you out, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss future plumbing tips. Drop any questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching.